If you value history told with respect and depth, subscribe to this channel. Here we remember the moments that shaped the world and the people who lived them. At dawn on June 6, 1944, more than 150,000 men crossed a dark and violent sea toward a coastline they had never seen before, fully aware that many of them would not survive the next few hours. They were not charging a battlefield in the traditional sense. They were invading the most heavily defended stretch of land on Earth. If they failed, Nazi Germany would remain entrenched in Western Europe. The war could drag on for years, and history itself would take a very different path. Everything, the fate of nations, the future of freedom, and the lives of millions yet unborn, depended on what would happen in the first minutes after those landing ramps dropped. Operation Overlord, the Allied invasion of Normandy, was not simply a military operation. It was the culmination of years of preparation, persuasion, sacrifice, and industrial mobilization on a scale never before attempted by any civilization. Long before the first soldier set foot on French soil, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt had faced the monumental task of preparing a reluctant nation for a global war. The United States had entered the conflict with a relatively small standing army, but within a short few years, millions of Americans were pulled from farms, factories, and cities and placed into uniform. They were trained, equipped, transported, and organized into a force powerful enough to challenge the strongest military machine Europe had ever known. The logistical challenge alone was staggering. Weapons had to be produced in unimaginable quantities. Ships had to be built faster than submarines could sink them. Aircraft, tanks, ammunition, fuel, and medical supplies had to cross an ocean infested with German U-boats. Entire ports were constructed, dismantled, and rebuilt. Roads, airfields, and supply depots appeared where none had ever existed before. Every detail mattered, because even the smallest failure could doom the entire operation. And still, despite all this preparation, success was far from guaranteed. Standing between the Allies and liberation was a vast system of defenses known as the Atlantic Wall. From the frozen coast of Norway to the beaches of southern France, Nazi Germany had spent years transforming Europe's western shoreline into a fortress. Thousands of concrete bunkers dotted the coastline, each designed to withstand naval bombardment. Trenches connected these positions like sinew between bones, allowing troops to move under fire. Heavy artillery pieces were positioned to rain destruction onto any invading force. Mines littered the beaches and shallow waters, while steel obstacles and wooden stakes were planted to tear apart landing craft and prevent gliders from touching down. The Atlantic Wall was not just a line of defense, it was a carefully engineered system designed to kill, delay, and break any army that dared to challenge it. Breaking through this wall required not only brute force, but deception. In the months leading up to D-Day, the Allies launched one of the most elaborate misinformation campaigns in military history. Fake radio transmissions filled the airwaves, suggesting multiple invasion forces. Inflatable tanks and dummy aircraft were positioned in southern England to convince German intelligence that the main assault would strike at Pas-de-Calais rather than Normandy. Entire phantom armies existed only on paper and in the minds of German commanders. The goal was simple: keep enemy forces spread thin, confused, and unable to respond decisively when the real invasion began. Even with all this preparation, the operation remained at the mercy of one uncontrollable force: the weather. The invasion required a rare combination of conditions: moderate seas, low but not too low cloud cover, sufficient visibility for aircraft, and a specific phase of the moon to guide airborne troops. For days, storms battered the English Channel, threatening to postpone the invasion indefinitely. Then a brief and uncertain weather window appeared. Allied commanders faced an agonizing decision: delay the invasion and risk losing surprise, or move forward and gamble everything on a fragile forecast. Ultimately, the order was given. There would be no turning back. For the men in the first wave, the invasion began hours before sunrise. They boarded ships in the darkness, seas already rough, stomachs churning with fear and motion sickness. Attempts at breakfast often ended as soon as they began. Landing craft were cramped, wet, and overcrowded. Soldiers climbed down slippery ropes, weighed down with more than 60 pounds of gear, their uniforms soaked before they even saw the enemy. Overhead, Allied aircraft thundered toward their targets, and many men looked to the sky hoping those planes would silence the guns waiting for them on shore. As the coastline became view, hope gave way to terror. German defenses were clearly visible: barbed wire, mines, concrete bunkers, and the dark openings of machine gun nests aimed directly at the landing craft. Mortar rounds and artillery shells exploded in the water, sending columns of spray and steel into the air. Then the landing craft ground to a halt, the ramp dropped, and in an instant, thousands of ordinary men were thrown into extraordinary violence. While the battle raged on the beaches of Normandy, an entire nation waited in silence. In Washington, Franklin Delano Roosevelt understood that his role was over. He had made every decision within his power. He had mobilized the nation, built the alliances, and armed the soldiers. Now the outcome rested entirely on the men fighting across the ocean. That evening, Roosevelt addressed the American people not as a commander, but as a fellow citizen. He asked the nation to pray. An estimated 100 million Americans listened as he spoke words of humility, fear, and hope. Churches filled, synagogues opened their doors, church bells rang across cities and small towns alike. It was perhaps the largest collective prayer in human history. At Beach, the cost of the invasion was especially severe. German fire tore through the first waves, pinning soldiers down against the shoreline. Casualties mounted rapidly, and for a time, the entire operation teetered on the brink of disaster. Yet through sheer determination, small groups of soldiers found gaps in the defenses. They climbed cliffs, destroyed bunkers, and pushed inland yard by yard. By midday on June 6, 1944, the impossible was beginning to happen. The Atlantic Wall was cracking. The beachhead was secured. D-Day did not end the war, but it made victory possible. It marked the beginning of the liberation of Western Europe and signaled that Nazi Germany could and would be defeated. More than that, it revealed a profound truth about freedom. Liberty is not an abstract concept preserved by words alone. On that morning, liberty arrived through chaos, fear, sacrifice, and courage. It came ashore carried by young men who understood that failure was not an option, even when survival was uncertain. Operation Overlord stands as one of the defining moments of the 20th century, not because it was flawless, but because it succeeded despite overwhelming odds. It reminds us that history is shaped not only by leaders and plans, but by ordinary individuals willing to endure extraordinary hardship. On June 6, 1944, the world changed, not in a single dramatic instant, but through countless acts of courage performed under fire. And from those beaches, liberty began its long and costly return to Europe. If you value history told with respect and depth, subscribe to this channel. Here we remember the moments that shaped the world and the people